All right, Joey, I'm coming to you first. We watched, obviously, that press conference there, short and sweet. What was your main takeaway? It sounded like the thorny issue was indeed the security guarantees. That's been the thorny issue for quite some time. They reduced it from a 28 plan to a 20-point plan. I don't know which 8 got tossed out necessarily, but where do you think they are?
Yeah, so what happened here is that Zelenskyy brought this agreement to Trump and said, let's work on this and see if you agree with me so I can take it to Putin or you can take it to Putin. So I don't want people to think that this is something where President Putin is already on board with this. That's going to be the problem. And I think the security guarantees is the biggest problem for the United States, because if you're going to treat Ukraine with the same defensive agreement that NATO offers, then what's the difference between that and joining NATO? And I don't know where Putin even would be on that. But then on the other side, I think where Russia is going to have the biggest problem is you're talking about a spot of land that Russia's saying they're fighting this war to obtain. They've gained control of most of it, talking about the Donbass. And in that region, Zelenskyy doesn't want to cede any of the land. He wants to create an economic freedom zone that's also a demilitarized zone. And then right next to that, have a buffer of what's called a fortress zone, where they basically would stack up their military. So you have this, I think he proposed anywhere between 5 and 40 meters of no military, but then right behind that would be a fortress to defend themselves. I don't see Putin agreeing to any of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know where, talking about 90%, 95%, that's between Ukraine and President Trump. I don't know where Putin falls in any of this.
Yeah, I think that's really the question. Kaylee, when we look at this, I think the American people want to see Ukraine succeed, as we all do. But there was a time where the blank checks kept rolling. And as we discussed yesterday, the compassion was starting to dry up a little bit. And we talked about a realism that had to reach Zelenskyy. Like, you're not going to get everything that you want. You're probably going to have to give something up. We know that the people are going to also have to, in some way, shape, or form, this referendum or parliament, agree to that. But the big question, as Joey mentioned, is Putin even on board? He's got the people. He's got enough money. Maybe he wants to keep fighting. I don't know if any security guarantee that the U.S. or Europe gives Ukraine ends up with Putin saying, sounds good, we'll stop fighting. What's your take?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that any security guarantee is necessarily worth it for the United States. As Joey mentioned, this is a concern because it's another form of a string attached to our aid to Ukraine. And I think American voters, although they want Ukraine to succeed, are rightly concerned about the amount of money that we've sent to the region. I mean, keep in mind, Ukraine has not necessarily been a great friend to the United States in the past. Before Putin invaded in 2022, it was one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Just because Putin invaded and started a war does not mean that Ukraine suddenly became a well-run and uncorrupt country. In fact, just this past week, there were reports about investigations into corruption among some of Zelensky's key allies. And quite frankly, we've made the problem worse by just not auditing or not checking any of the billions of dollars that we've sent to them. So this is a concern that I think many other American voters share, and it's going to have to factor into the decision that President Trump makes in regards to the country moving forward.
Tom, how much does Europe need to do here? Because President Trump has said it. He kind of hinted at it again in that press conference. Hey, y'all are neighbors. So Europe's got to step up. And if you want security guarantees, I don't know why Europe, the rest of the countries there, wouldn't be the first ones to pony up. We know that they've agreed to some, but it still feels like, to Kaylee's point, Zelensky's looking for the USA to come in and do the work.
Well, he is. And the thing is, Trump can say that about Europe, and, they can say, oh, we want to do everything we can to help, but they're not going to do it. They're just going to sit on the sidelines. It's up to the United States. Trump knows it. Zelenskyy knows it at this point. And I think the interesting thing about this is that you saw President Trump at that press conference. He brings up the Russia hoax in every press conference. Not only, he brought it up in every question.
Yeah.
He repeats that over and over. And the mainstream media tends to chuckle at that. But the thing is, I'm glad he's doing that because we should be doing that. The Russia hoax is not just a thing that they did to try to, to get Trump. The Russia hoax became our foreign policy. Obama threw sanctions on Russia, which had to do with the Russia hoax. On the way out the door of his administration, he hit them with big sanctions. He did it to try to box in Trump. They had foreign policy decisions that they were making that were political in nature. So a lot of what's gone on with Russia and Ukraine, it does have to do with American foreign policy, and it does have to do with that Russia hoax.
It absolutely does. Well, we'll have to wait and see on that one. More to come, I'm sure. But you won't want to miss this. Fresh off that meeting with President Trump, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy sits down with Bret Baier tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern on Fox News Special Report. Make sure you're watching that.
Hey, it's Will Kane. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Kane podcast for full episodes right now.